Namaskar friends, welcome to session 37 of our course on manufacturing guidelines for product design. So as you are well aware, we are in the 8th week of our discussion, and in the last week we have tried to identify the topics which are most relevant in present scenario or in today's scenario. And as all of us are well aware, there are different missions, different projects, different guidelines being established by the various authorities, governments regarding the environment. So, lot of focus is there on the sustainable products, sustainable manufacturing, green products, green furniture. So, why such a focus in today's scenario? Because the environment that which we are living in or in which we are living needs to be protected. We are seeing lot of catastrophes, lot of atmospheric changes, climatic changes that are taking place all across the globe. We are seeing floods, forest fires, number of other issues which are causing maybe lot of damage, lot of harm to the individuals, to the people. So there are lot of problems associated with the harming of the environment or by actions that we take which affect the environment in a negative way. So therefore we see there are number of types of products that we see around us, and each of the product has got an connection with the environment. Both ways, the traffic is both ways. The environment affects the product and the product affects the environment. But we are more focused on how the product is going to affect the environment. So we see that there are a lot of maybe changes that can be done in the way we develop our products, the way we design our products, the way we conceptualize our products. So I am coming in the reverse order. So first is I am coming from manufacturing. We must focus on how we manufacture our products. We must focus on how we design our product, and in the long run we must also focus on how we use our products so that we have a less damaging effect on the environment, or we must say that there is no damage to the environment. That is the basic logic behind including these two sessions, that is session number 36 and session number 37, that today there is lot of focus on developing environment friendly products, and therefore we must focus on the design for environment aspects when we are designing our products. So just to have a quick review of what we have covered in session number 36, we have seen that what do we mean by design for environment. We have seen that there is a natural biocycle and then there is an industrial product cycle, and there is a interaction between the two. They intersect each other. How they intersect? They intersect from the materials point of view, that we derive the materials from the natural biocycle, then we convert them into the useful products, then the products are consumed, and at the end of life the products have 3 or 4 options available. We can use them in remanufacturing, we can reuse them, or we can dispose them off into the natural biocycle. And we have seen that 3 types of outputs go into the natural biocycle. Now, these 3 outputs, which are the inputs for the biocycle or outputs of the product cycle, that are, they can be toxins, they can be inorganic waste, it can be organic waste. So we have to be judicious in deciding that what type of waste we are pushing back into the biocycle or the natural cycle, and that is where lot of focus of the present day designers must be, and it is. I am saying must be means we must focus. Those who are not focusing, they need to focus, and many of the designers have already started thinking in those terms, that how this interaction between the natural biocycle and the industrial product cycle can be made more effective in such a way that the overall interaction has a positive influence on our environment. And that is only possible maybe that can be a 2-step process, that when we extract materials from nature, we must focus on the renewable sources of, or renewable resources, or renewable sources of materials, renewable sources of energy. And when we dispose of the material into the environment after the end of life of the product, they must be biodegradable, they must be amenable to natural decay, so that again they get converted into the resources over a period of time. So that is the focus where the engineers, scientists must work in order to make this interaction between the two cycles more and more environment friendly. So basically, in order to achieve these objectives, today we are going to have a brief review of the various steps that must be taken into account while we are developing a new product. So it is not something that it is maybe at a particular stage during the product development cycle we will focus on environment. It is a universal phenomenon or a universal approach. Right from the conceptualization of the idea in our mind, we must focus on the environment. That means that if this idea is implemented, it is converted into a tangible product, how it is going to affect the environment, what type of materials we must select for making this product, what is the total life of the product, how this product is going to interact with the environment, and what is going to happen to the product after it has lived its life. So all these things have to be taken into account when the idea comes to our mind. Similarly, we also have to focus on that when the product will be manufactured, which processes will be used to manufacture the product, how these processes are going to interact with the environment, how much maybe air pollution, water pollution these processes are going to cause when the product is being manufactured. So right from the conceptualization to materials to manufacturing to consumption, for example, I am using a particular product, how it is going to affect the environment. So from consumption point of view also we have to take into account. Again, at the end of life, whether the materials that we have used are recyclable, whether they can be reused, whether they can be remanufactured, or in which form they can be disposed of into the environment, all those things have to be taken into account. So all through the product development cycle, our focus must primarily be on how the environment can be protected, how the product can be conceptualized, designed, developed and consumed so that it has a least impact or least detrimental effect on the environment. So what is this step by step process? In today's session, maybe in the next 25 minutes, we will try to just have a overview or a brief overview of the steps that are involved in the design for environment process. So let us quickly now move towards the process that must be followed when we are designing a product. Now, effective implementation of design for environment includes activities throughout the product development process. Throughout is very important here. So it is not that at one single step we will apply the guidelines and then we forget about the environment. It has to be throughout the product development process, right from idea generation to the end of life of the product. We have to focus on the environment or the interaction of the product with the environment. Steps of the DFE, this is design for environment process are, so we will see, set the design for environment agenda, identify potential environmental impacts. So as I have already explained, we need to understand that how the product is going to affect the environment. Select the DFE guidelines. There are standard set of guidelines, standard set of questions that we must ask, that we must follow when we are designing the product. Apply the DFE guidelines to the initial designs. Assess the environmental effect of applying these guidelines, that whether the overall effect of the guideline is a positive effect or which design is giving us a better environmental impact, better in the sense that is less damaging to the environment, less harmful to the environment. Then maybe we will see that there are number of designs available with us. One of the designs is better as compared to the others in our environmental impact assessment, and then we finalize that design and try to refine that design further so that we can even make the design better from the, not only from the functional or aesthetic point of view, but also from the environmental impact point of view. Then reflects on the DFE process and result. So finally we have to see that what is the process, what are the results that we have achieved after applying the DFE guidelines. Now despite the linear presentation of the steps, now we have seen that going from step number 1 to step number 7, we have followed a very linear approach, one after the other, but usually that linear approach is not the one that we are going to actually see in practice. Now despite the linear presentation of the steps, product development teams will likely repeat some steps several times. So this is an iterative process. We go to a new design, then we see that it is maybe it is helpful in saving air pollution, but it may cause another type of pollution. So that is then again we revisit our design, try to iterate, try to modify the design. So repeat some steps several times. So therefore in the overall step by step process, some of the steps may be repeated number of times until we achieve our value, that is the maybe we have put a value of impact assessment or a criteria that the value, overall value must be less than X. Now until and unless we achieve that X value, we will keep on iterating our design, making DFE or design for environment as an iterative process. So it is iterative, number of designs are conceptualized, then their effect on the environment is seen, calculated, and finally we reiterate, finalize the best design which is causing the environment or maybe causing less damage to the environment and is below the critical value that is allowed by the various rules and regulations or the authorities who are taking care of the environment, or maybe the impact of the product design is less because it is causing the environment pollution, but the value is much below the critical value. So that is what we can expect. Now basically if we can take an example to understand this, that all vehicles that we are running on fuel. Now the fuel, most of the vehicles that run on maybe petrol or diesel, so it is a non-renewable resource of energy. So we are using a non-renewable resource of energy. Now during consumption, while the fuel is burned, lot of gases are liberated. So when these gases come out, they are definitely causing some amount of air pollution, but now the various regulatory authorities have prescribed certain limits that the vehicle must not produce gases beyond a particular limit, or an environmental check or air pollution check certificate is issued to the vehicles. So there is a critical value below which even you can run the vehicle, but if the vehicle is emitting gases which are above the critical value, then the certificate will not be issued. So similar is the case here also. We have to ensure that our design must be able to address the critical limits that have been laid down for the various types of products, various types of segments, and if we are able to design the product meeting those criteria or meeting those deadlines, we will be very easily able to maybe get the permissions to produce the product. So therefore this is a very important point from the product designer's point of view, that we must keep in mind these things also, or these criteria also, when we are designing the products. Now these are the standard steps that are there. Now one by one we will try to understand them. So let us quickly go to the approach, how it is done. So we can see all these 7 steps are now reflected in a flow chart. So first is set the DFE agenda, which we have already seen. Identify the potential environmental impacts, select materials and DFE guidelines, apply DFE guidelines on initial designs. Very important, because we need to have a number of initial designs and then we have to finalize that which design is going to help us. So we have number of designs which are available with us. Assess the environmental impact of each design, compare to the DFE goals. So DFE has a particular set of goals or criteria that must be met. So we will see that which design is satisfying the goals of DFE. So if yes, if satisfies our goals, satisfies the criteria, we will focus on or reflect on the DFE process and the result. And if these are not met, no. If the DFE goals are not met, so what we will do? We will redesign or we will refine the design. So therefore we normally call it as a iterative process. because again and again we have to revisit some of the steps. So we have to see the activities throughout the product development process. So this is the overall product development process, and our focus is on each and every step that is there in the product development cycle. In the very first session we have seen that what are the various stages or steps involved in the product development cycle. So that is again coming into picture here. So we have product planning, concept development, maybe I can number them: 2 system level design, 3 detailed design, 4 and process improvement, 5. So this is maybe step by step approach for conceptualizing and developing a particular product, and we can see that simultaneously our focus is on design for environment guidelines also. So when we are talking of concept development, we have to focus on what type of materials we are going to use for making this product, and when we are finalizing the materials, our focus will be that we must select the materials which are environment friendly. So step by step we will try to apply the DFE principle in our product development, more importantly product design process. Now there are 7 steps mentioned. Quickly we will try to review each of these and try to see that if we follow these steps religiously, we will be able to come up with a product which is having minimal or no impact on our environment. So first is set the DFE agenda, drivers, goals and the team. So first we have to see that how we are going to implement the DFE in our product design process. So the DFE process begins as early as the product planning phase, which we have seen in the previous slide. Let us go back and see. This is set the DFE agenda and this is product planning stage. So in the very beginning only we start to set our DFE agenda. Maybe we will formulate a team, we will set our goals, that what is our target. Maybe our target may be to develop a product which is based on completely waste materials. So we say that these waste materials which are otherwise going to go and damage the environment, we are going to use these waste materials to create our product. Maybe in one of the very well known sports company has already set a agenda, or we can say a DFE agenda, in which they have told that all the plastic that goes into the manufacturing of their, or all the polymers that go into the manufacturing of their product will be 100% reused polymers only. They will not use fresh polymers for making the product. So that type of agenda has to be set in the very beginning of our product development process. So why? Because now we know that this is the material, it is environment friendly, or it is going to cause less damage to the environment, or if this material would have been disposed into the environment, it would be an environmental hazard. So you select that material, that yes, this material, now out of this material only we have to make our product. So you change the product design, you change the processing strategy that you are using, you change the calculations, maybe your calculations will change, your detailed design will change. So all that is done based on our agenda, our goal, that we are going to use X material only because it is less damaging to the environment, or it is a waste, so we are going to use the waste for producing a new product. So that type of agenda has to be set in the very beginning of our product planning stage. So here we can see, so the DFE process begins in the very beginning of our product development cycle. So as early as the product planning phase with setting the DFE agenda, as I have already taken an example. Now this step consists of the 3 important activities: identifying the internal and external drivers of design for environment, setting the environmental goals for the product, as I have already discussed, setting up the DFE team. So maybe we will have used the HR resources also, the team, the people who are experts in this area, those will be selected. So that is setting up the team, setting up the agenda, setting up the internal and external drivers. So drivers can be that there are strict norms, regulations set by the government that this has to be met. So this criteria has to be met. So that is one driver, maybe external driver within the or from outside the company. Internal drivers can be that company wants to be creating a niche market for themselves, in which they say that our products are the most less damaging products which are going to be environment friendly. So there can be internal driver, the company frames a policy that they are going to make products which are not going to damage the environment, as well as there can be external drivers, the government also pressurizes the companies to adopt the materials and processes which are less damaging to the environment. So both type of drivers have to be identified in the very beginning stage. So by setting this, the organization identifies a clear and actionable, both are very important, path towards the environment friendly product design. So this is a summary that we want to focus on environment friendly product design. So we have to set up very clear and actionable output. So actionable means that maybe the time also is limited, the time also is fixed, sorry, that we will be able to achieve it by 2020. So that is actionable. Then this is what has to be done. So the output is very defined and very clear. That is the first stage. So we are very clear in our mind that this is what we are going to achieve. This is the team which has been dedicated for achieving this objective. What are the parameters, or which are the internal or external drivers which are forcing us to change, because we want to make products which are more friendly to the environment. Now after this has been done, we identify the potential environmental impacts. This enables the product development team to consider environmental impacts at the concept stage, even though little or no specific data are yet available for the actual product and a detailed environmental impact assessment is not yet possible. So in the very beginning only, at the concept design stage only, the environmental impacts are considered. Why? Because in the very beginning we know that if we choose maybe this type of material or this type of process, it is well established that it is going to have less impact on the environment. But how much less, what are the quantified terms, that data is not yet available. Little or no specific data are yet available for the actual product. But in general the concept is built that because we are now using a biodegradable material for making a product, so we assume that it will have less environmental impact on our environment. Why? Because this will, after the end of life, the materials that are used for making the product will automatically biodegrade into the environment, causing less harm to the environment. So we are not completely doing the detailed environmental impact assessment, but in general a concept is developed that this type of strategy can help us mitigate or minimize the effect of our process, materials, product on the environment. Now the chart shown below is an adaptation of the LID's wheel and the Eco Design Web. To create this chart, the team asks questions like, what are the significant sources of potential environmental impact in each life cycle stage? Now life cycle stages you can see here are mentioned, maybe material selection is one, production, distribution, use, recovery. So what type of environmental impact all these life cycle stages are going to have, that is plotted here. So we can see materials have higher impact as compared to the use, and the most important environmental impact is the recovery. Whether the materials that are going to use, or the parts or equipment or the sub assemblies that are being used in the product, can they be reused, remanufactured, recycled, or can they be disposed of into the environment without causing any harm to the environment? All those points have to be taken into account. So this is showing us a relative environmental impact at the various stages of the life cycle of the product. So we can make this type of chart, and then we can focus on the important stage or an important phase which is having more value, or maybe which is having more environmental impact. Like in this case we can see our recovery is very important. So recovery is also dependent upon the type of materials we choose and the type of production process that we use. So we will try to focus on materials, we will try to focus on production, so that we can reduce their environmental impact also, as well as reduce the effect of recovery also on the environmental effect. So each stage will have different impact. So we can see, we have in the previous slide, again I will go, we can see materials, production, distribution, use and recovery. So each one of these we can focus one by one. So let us quickly see materials, how much and what type of recyclable materials will be used, how much and what types of non-recyclable material will be used, how much and what type of additives will be used, what is the environmental profile of the materials. From production point of view, how many and what type of production processes will be used, how much and what kind of auxiliary materials are needed, how high will be the energy consumption, how much waste will be generated after the process. Similarly, from distribution, what kind of transport packaging, bulk packaging and retail packaging will be used, volumes, weights, materials, reusability of the packaging materials, which means of transportation will be used and how much maybe will be the carbon footprint for this transportation process only. Regarding the use, how much and what type of energy will be required to use a particular product, and this is very relevant to each one of us. When we buy a electrical appliance, we try to see how much star rating is there. Why? Because it depends upon the consumption of electricity. So what type of energy will be required, how much and what kind of consumables will be needed, what will be the technical lifetime, what will be the aesthetic lifetime of the product. So from use point of view also we must try to find answers to all these questions. Then from recovery, how can the product be reused, will the components or materials be reused, what materials will be recycled, will recyclable materials be identifiable, how will the product be disposed of. Answers to all these questions have to be asked during the product development cycle only, because once our design is ready and it goes into manufacturing, not much can be changed. So during the product design stage only, if we look for answers to all these questions, we will be able to develop a design, conceptualize a design which will be able to give a satisfactory answer to all these queries. So we must be able to address these queries in a very positive manner. Positive manner means that yes, the product is recyclable, the materials can be reused, the material can be recycled. Even yesterday there was a program in the TV in which it was shown that there is a focus that the use of single use plastic has to be minimized. So which means that we have to now try to look for products or develop products which are maybe multiple use, so which is recyclable. So once the product has been used, you recycle it and make a new product, then the second product has been used, you recycle it and make a third product. Recyclable materials have to be used so that the products can be recycled or the impact on the environment can be minimized. Now these are the two things that we have to focus in the very beginning. Now select the DFE guidelines. Each life cycle stage has its own DFE guidelines that provide product development teams with instructions on how to reduce the environmental impacts of the product. So there are guidelines which we need to follow when we are doing our product design, focused on the environmental impact of the product design. So when we are looking at the environmental impact, we must look at these guidelines. Many guidelines related to selection of materials. This is very important. So maybe as we have seen in the chart which was showing the relative impact of the various stages of the life cycle of the product on the environmental impact, we have seen that materials contribute significantly to the environmental impact. So the many guidelines are related to the selection of materials. This shows the central role of materials in the design for environment. And in the previous session number 36, we have seen that there is a natural biocycle and industrial product cycle which is focused more on the selection of materials and disposal of materials into the environment after the end of the product or after the end of life of the product. Now let us see materials, design for environment, guidelines for materials, sustainability of resources. Sustainability is a very key word in the product design these days. So specify renewable and abundant resources, which I have already highlighted in the very beginning of today's session. Specify recyclable and or recycled materials. As I have given an example in today's class, a very well known company has decided to use the recycled plastics only in their product or recycled polymers into their new products. Specify renewable forms of energy. So this is sustainability of resources. Healthy inputs and outputs. specify non-hazardous materials, install protection against release of pollutants and hazardous substances. So, the pollutants and hazardous substances should not be directly disposed of into the rivers or should not be directly filled into the landfills. Because of the leaching action, sometimes the groundwater may get polluted. So, we have to be very cautious of how we are interacting with the environment or how our products are interacting with the environment. Include labels and instruction for safe handling of the toxic materials. Now, at the production stage, we can say minimal use of resources in production, employ as few manufacturing steps as possible, specify materials that do not require surface treatments or coatings, minimize the number of components in design for assembly. Also, we say use the modular design. Similarly, distribution, minimal use of resources in distribution, minimize the packaging, use recyclable or reusable packaging materials, employ folding, nesting or disassembly to distribute products in a compact state, apply structural techniques and materials to minimize the total volume of materials. So, basically we can see that right from the selection of materials to the production of materials into the products, right from distribution to the maybe the next stage is the use, we have certain set of guidelines that we must follow. So, from use point of view, we can see that when we are using the product, efficiency of resources during use we must ensure, that is implement the default power down for subsystems that are not in use. So, many times we have seen that whenever we go to a hotel, the lights in the corridors automatically get switched on. So, there are sensors that sense the movement and automatically switches on the lights. So, that is during the use the power consumption is optimized. Similarly, when we are designing the products, we must design the products in such a way that if they are not in use, automatically they can be switched off. So, implement default power down for subsystems that are not in use. Similarly, implement intuitive controls for resource saving features. So, that is also very important. Use feedback mechanisms to indicate how much energy or water are being consumed. So, very quickly we can take into account that we can get a feedback and then make a review that how much energy we are consuming or maybe any other resource like water we are using. Similarly, the intuitive controls for resource saving feature. So, we can have an intuition that maybe this thing or this particular part or energy is being used may not be optimally utilized during this period. So, we can very easily use intuitive controls to optimize our use of resources. So, whenever we are designing a product, we must design it in such a way, we must include systems, subsystems in such a way that they are energy efficient. Then during use only we have to focus on appropriate durability, consider the aesthetics and functionality to ensure the aesthetic life is equal to the technical life. So, that is very important. Many times suppose the product is not looking that good aesthetically, although it is satisfying our requirement. So, usually we throw that product. So, that is also basically misuse of the energy which has gone, misuse of the materials that have gone into the product. So, during manufacturing, as we have seen, when we are producing a product, lot of energy is consumed. So, we must try to design the product in such a way that the aesthetic values are equivalent to the functional values, so that as long as the product is in use or functionally satisfying the requirement for which the product has been designed, it must also be aesthetically long lasting, that is for long life it must be used, it must be good looking throughout its life. Also facilitate repair and upgrading. Many times we do not want to get our products repaired and we want to change it to a new product or advanced version of the products. Why? Because the repair cost is high. Sometimes the repairing is difficult, we do not have the expertise or the people who can repair the product. So, when we are designing the product, we must take into account that the repair and upgradation is possible. Ensure minimal maintenance, minimize the failure mode, so that we are able to use the product for a long duration of time. So, we have seen that right from the selection of materials to production to consumption, maybe to distribution, sorry, then to use, we have certain set of guidelines. So if we follow these guidelines, we will be able to design and develop a product which is environment friendly, which is consuming less power, which is having less impact on the environment. Just to have the review at what are the guidelines. So we can see that there are guidelines for materials, there are guidelines for production, there are guidelines for distribution, there are guidelines for use, then there are guidelines for recovery also, disassembly and separation as well as purification. Ensure that joints and fasteners are easily accessible, which means it is easy to disassemble the product. Specify joints and fasteners so that they are separable by hand or with common tools. Ensure that the incompatible materials are easily separated. So when we are specifying a material for a particular product or sub parts, we must ensure that we can separate them out at the end of life, and then we can reuse them, remanufacture them or recycle them. Then the step 4, apply the DFE guidelines to the initial product design. Now we have seen that initially we have to philosophically ensure that we have set the right agenda. Then we have to see that whatever steps we are taking are going to help us to design our product in a much better manner from the environmental point of view. Then we have seen that there are certain set of guidelines, we apply these guidelines on our product design. So that is a step 4. First, step 3 is that we have understanding of the DFE guidelines. Step 4 is apply the DFE guidelines to the initial product design. Then once we have applied these guidelines, we have taken care of these guidelines, try to assess the environmental impact. The next step is to assess to the extent possible the environmental impacts of the product over its entire life cycle. Which product or which design? The design on which we have already applied the DFE guidelines. To do so with precision requires a detailed understanding of how the product is to be produced, distributed, used over its lifetime and recycled or disposed at the end of its useful life. So for each of these stages of the product in the product life cycle, we have already covered the guidelines that have to be implemented from the DFE point of view. So if we implement those guidelines, we can very easily calculate the effect of these guidelines on the product design or on the product during the various stages of its life cycle. Refine the product design to reduce or eliminate the environmental impact. Now, even after applying the guidelines, some of the guidelines may not be applicable to our product design. So we have a certain amount of environmental impact. So what we will try to do, we will do the iterative process, we will try to redesign the product or the part which is having higher environmental impact. So the objective of this step and subsequent DFE iterations, already I have used the word iterative, is to reduce or eliminate any significant environmental impacts through the redesign. The process repeats until the environmental impacts have been reduced to an acceptable level, which I have already highlighted in the today's session, and the environmental performance of the product fits the DFE goals, which we have already listed in the very first step of our process or the design for environment process. Redesign for ongoing improvement of DFE may also contribute after the production begins. So it is not that once the production has started for the product, we cannot focus on DFE. So DFE is a continuous process. Number 1, at each and every stage of the product development cycle, we can focus on the DFE guidelines, and even after the production has started, our focus on DFE can continue. Redesign for ongoing improvement of DFE may also continue after the production begins. Now step 7, reflect on the DFE process and the results. With every aspect of the product development process, the final activity is to ask how well did we execute the DFE process, all these steps that we have studied today. How can our DFE process be improved? What can be the further improvements in our product design? What DFE improvement can be made on derivative and future products. So this is a continuous process, because every day technology is changing, every day scientists and engineers are coming up with new and new materials, new and new processes, new and new technology, new and new strategies. So when there is a continuous change in the way we design our products, the way we produce our products, the way we transport our products, the way we recycle our products. So with the change in technology, every day things are changing. So continuously we must try to strive for making our products which are much more environment friendly as compared to maybe today. So in 2018, suppose we make a product, we are using specific set of materials, specific set of processes, but with the time new and new materials are coming in the market. So we can plan to change our material to a more environment friendly material. We can try to change our process to a more environment friendly process. So that is the overall objective of these two sessions that we have covered in our overall course on manufacturing guidelines for product design. So we have seen what is DFV in the previous session, session number 36. Today we have focused on the steps involved in the DFV process. So there is a long list of questions which are associated with each product life cycle stage. So if we are able to address all these questions, the product that we will push into the market will be environment friendly and will certainly gain importance from the consumers who are more and more informed today, who want to use products which are environment friendly. Maybe in our subsequent sessions, our focus will be on other important topics like product architecture, rapid prototyping, and finally we will try to summarize the course in the last session, that is session number 40. So with this I conclude the today's session. Thank you.